Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I wanted to continue my previous Final Fantasy reward discussion in sort of a tangential way. If you missed that video, it largely covers places the dev team could add rewards to the game after Yoshi P made a statement saying there would be about 50% more rewards by the halfway point in Dawn Trail as opposed to Endwalker. However, in that video, I alluded to a problem they would have with adding rewards in some content, and that's what I'm going to discuss in this video. You see, Final Fantasy XIV's been developed as a game where execution is king. Entire tiers are designed to be cleared with the bare minimum of gear, and in 95% of the game that means there's almost no barrier for entry other than, story completion and some crafted gear. The exception being on-content ultimates, which usually require best in slot or close to it. With that in mind, stats and gear are equally as simple. There's only a few total stats in the game for every role, so decisions about what gear to obtain often have just a little bit of variance from patch to patch and job to job. With no skill trees or ability variables to contend with, it keeps the gear portion of the barrier for entry at its absolute lowest. Now, I'm all for that. I love a low barrier for entry gameplay-wise. I've never really liked the concept of content being deliberately designed to be unclearable just because you didn't have enough gear, as opposed to our player skill demand outside of the absolute peak, which still has basically one set of gear in mind for its balancing. But this does actually create a problem for the dev team. How do you improve the structure of rewards in your game if your game is too simple to offer meaningful rewards? Of course, our solution is always, a fancy title, new minions, new mounts, cosmetics, the usual stuff. And for a lot of things, that's fine. But it does exactly the kind of thing that Yoshi P said he doesn't really want to do going forward. It stifles creativity with the dev team. Now, some of its problems are because of the stats. Skill and spell speed require very specific values. Crit is bloated as a stat. Direct hit rate makes damage even more swingy, and determination's just another damage buff. Yeah, there's another component to it, but who really cares? Piety's all right, and tenacity is largely a joke. Now, there are tons of suggestions to adjust the stats as is, and they all come with different drawbacks. Splitting crit into two stats, removing direct hit rate to reduce the swinginess of DPS, adjusting rotations to make speed builds more valuable. I could list a dozen things or more that I want them to do with stats, and honestly, it doesn't really answer the question. Yeah, I could just say add more stats, delete some stats, whatever, but the true goal is really to offer more gearing options for players that empower them without overly upsetting game balance. It's honestly a nigh impossible task, especially when the team has spent so long following down the path they're currently on. And that's not even the end of the problem. I've heard people argue against putting more gear in the game, like Criterion having gear, for example, because they're like, oh, I don't want to do Criterion to get best in slot. So you just want less options in the game because you don't want to do one thing? Then just don't do it and get the other sets of gear. We're so complicated as gamers. So what are potential solutions? How do we keep gearing simple and accessible while increasing the rewarding feeling of obtaining it and giving players more options when they're seeking to increase their item level and player power? I had a few answers to this, some we've discussed before, and some I think are more indicative of things that have already worked in Final Fantasy XIV. First off, I think it's about time we started experimenting with new effects on gear, whether that be set bonuses for having multiple pieces from the same type of content, or even alternative means by offering a small degree of customization. Yeah, there's probably going to be some balancing nightmares, but hey, that's usually when the most fun stuff happens, is when things are just a little unbalanced. Maybe a little more than a little, but you know what I mean. The way I look at it is like this. Content is designed to be cleared with crafted gear, at least the most difficult content is, right? Which I think is fine. It acts as sort of like a neutral starting point for every tier. Once you've already cleared the tier, any power you add onto stuff just makes it more fun or exciting kind of as a bonus. It makes collecting tome pieces and raid pieces each week a bit more exciting if they have these different bonus effects, and adds potential value for tangential gear releases in places like Alliance raids or any other sets they want to add in. And when it comes to Ultimate, any serious contender is just going to get BIS regardless. So whichever set bonuses or bonus effects on anything are dominant should already be acquired by the time this happens. The game has so much gear funneled to people, and they've already modified the gear system and will probably continue to modify it to make it so that gearing is not a pain. And as long as they do that, then something like this would be fine. And I do think you can't make this change in a vacuum. I do think you need to make gear more available earlier on as well. Unlock the tier earlier, raise the tome cap or reduce the cost of tome gear, whatever, and maybe add some more tome upgrades into Criterion or add new sets of armor, whatever. I think it's worth the cost of reducing the time players spend gearing one job if you make the idea of gearing multiple jobs more exciting simultaneously. Another idea that I've discussed with a few people is jobstone materia you meld onto your actual jobstone to grant entirely unique effects. Since the jobstone item level is so low, the only real concern would be content under item level 30 not working with our current sync system, and to be honest, they could probably change that. This does have its own set of problems. They'd probably have to incorporate it into the gearing process right at level 30. You don't want to just add it to level 90 plus, and that means adding rewards throughout the entire game up to that point. Not to mention, you'd probably have to assign item level to the materia itself, because otherwise you could pick up maybe like a level 40 materia and it's the best thing for the rest of the game. Like, there might be a point where something's too exciting at a low level, you get it, and then the system just kind of doesn't exist until at some point they replace it with something else. And then if you add item level to the materia, does that get synced down? Does the effect get taken away in lower content? You see, the problem is even that requires kind of an overhaul of the materia system and the jobstone itself. But while there's problems with all of these solutions, I think we got to take a chance. We as a community, we fully expect something like this to kind of go poorly. I think a lot of us want this, but a lot of us also know the inherent risk is probably going to go exactly as we expect. Some job is going to have an effect that just barrels ahead of the other jobs, and then raiders are going to be like, well, that job's got to get taken. I think we know no matter what, there's going to be growing pains into it. And if it's the job you like playing, you're like, oh, great, I can find a party no matter what. And if it's not, you feel terrible and you start to grow a little bit of resentment. Listen, I get it. I get what all the risks are, but if they really want to have more rewards in the game, I don't think we can continue to just rely on mounts, minions, titles, and the like. Yes, they are very important. And yes, if they continue to add more fashion accessories, more things for the adventure plate, all that stuff, great, they should do that. But this is a facet of the game that has been stagnant for 10 years. And if they are realistically looking at improving it over the next 10 years, then they should probably start with Dawntrail. If they aren't, then, 8.0. Now, that's kind of my shakeup to the way that the game currently works. But the way the game currently works actually has a solution already in it to some degree, and it's something that's proven to have worked for people who have a wider variety of interests in Final Fantasy XIV. I'm talking about a concept called Content Islands, and no, I'm not talking about Island Sanctuary. No, Content Island is a term used to describe a place in the game or a piece of content where the player's power is not solely determined through item level increases, but through specific progression paths within that content that only empower you in that content. 14 has quite a few of these already. Deep Dungeon and its Ether Pool system, Eureka and its elemental levels, its bonuses, its gear, Bozia and its haste on gear, the actions and the items. The weapons and armor from this content can be used as traditional item level for all other content, and Glam, which a lot of people go to it for, but as specific bonus effects for using it within these content islands. And like I said, this has successfully motivated players to collect armor and weapons to better facilitate these activities that they enjoy doing. And I do see it as a path forward for Final Fantasy XIV. And it's funny to me because I'm usually against that kind of stuff. I always look at Warframe, which is a game that I love. I played it for a while, and as I started getting into the later parts, and it was like, well, you can go do Fortuna, you can go do, you can go do the plains. It's like, oh, well, what do I really want to do? And it never really felt like there was a clear answer. So Content Islands can be a little confusing. But in 14, it's always been so simple that honestly, it never really feels that way. It just feels like I have a new set of rules to learn, and I'll get some stuff inside that'll make me stronger in there, and that's kind of about it. For example, let's say you add gear to Criterion that specifically grants you bonus effects when you're inside Criterion itself, whether that be a new unique stat like Criterion Power that functions similarly to Elemental bonus, or special effects such as boosting potencies or adding effects to existing skills. Things that shake up the game but are isolated within Criterion itself. Much like with Eureka, this stuff wouldn't be necessary to clear the content. You'd still be clearing it without any of it, but add another form of progression that the player can enjoy and might encourage them to go back and do it more. Alongside this, I think you actively cap the item level on Criterion across the entire expansion. So from dungeon to dungeon release, gear can still hold relevance, but newer gear keeps increasing in item level to match the patch they release in, so you can go use it anywhere else. I really do think that having more activities where they reward that kind of gear, which gives you another gearing option for traditional item level in the usual style of raids, but allows you to just do something a little bit different. I gotta say, one of my favorite things in Shadowbringers was doing Delubrum speedruns. Not even Savage, Delubrum normal speedruns while I was working on my Shadowbringers Relic. We got our runs down to about 11 minutes because we were using our actions very intelligently. We would make sure we would coordinate that kind of stuff. But even as an individual, I could just just bring some stuff that greatly empowered my character. I had haste. I was a 1.6 GCD monk just blasting through things with these bonus actions, these huge numbers. Big dopamine hits, both with the speed and power that I was able to bring. And it's an experience that was so completely unique to that content. I cherish it, and it's a wonderful memory. So why not create more of that kind of stuff within Final Fantasy XIV itself? And again, I'm not saying this is perfect. There's always going to be a drawback. I think every single solution any of us come up with is going to have a drawback. But we got to accept that at some point. This game that plays this perfect balancing act that just is so close. Like, yeah, people say like, oh, this job's better than this job. The difference is usually so minor that in any serious level, nobody cares as long as you're playing the job well. You know, every time someone new starts the game, they're like, oh, which job does the most DPS? I'm going to play that one. It's like an essay to explain to them why that doesn't matter. You know, like, oh, well, I mean, technically, if you want to look at this job, it has this amount of DPS on average, which is the highest. But, you know, that's if you factor in the fact that your party members may not play well, then suddenly this job does actually more. So in other words, just play whatever you think is cool. Like, you always got to explain the whole thing out. And that's great. I don't think that needs to go anywhere, but it's like, it's already so closely balanced that we need those kind of explanations when new people come in just to explain that they can play whatever they want. You know, we could just have a little bit more fun. If we have a little bit more of a difference between some jobs because they just didn't balance it correctly, then so be it. As long as it doesn't hinder our ability to do content. And that's the number one thing that needs to be preserved, is entry into content is still okay for every job, which will come down to the actual balancing of jobs without these bonus effects on gear. Then get the bonus effects after you've already cleared all of the content, and now you're just having more fun collecting gear. You're having more fun going back and doing your weekly re-clears. You're having more fun trying out other jobs. And I just think you've got a healthier and more fun game, even if it does mean some imbalances at those upper levels. But that's just me. I could have this discussion all day. And like I said, I've got dozens and dozens of ideas and solutions. And, you know, I'm just one person. You know, I have no influence over the dev team as much as some people like to think that, you know, we do as content creators. No, it's the collective community ideas that bring things out. Maybe we echo some of those things and it looks that way. They don't care what any individual thinks. They care what everyone thinks. And so I'm just here to have a discussion about it. I don't think my ideas need to be in the game, and I don't think they're any more valuable or less valuable than anyone else's. I just wanted to have a discussion. So hopefully you can join in the discussion in the comment section below, because I'm sure a lot of you have ideas and suggestions or agreements and disagreements with what I've said here. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned. Dawntrail is less than 3 months away, and any news that we get, you can be sure I'll be repeating it here. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.